You found just stories, simple, heartfelt moments from real lives, stories that remind us how connected we all are through love, loss, and hope. Get cozy. The stories are about to begin. Dr. Eleanor headed towards the coffee machine, intending to make a double portion of hot, strong savior. Tonight was going to be a shift in the emergency service, and she still hadn't learned to sleep in short snatches for half an hour between calls. Was that really rest? Only Sparky, as they nicknamed the quick nurse Livy, with whom the pediatric ambulance doctor had been through many critical situations, could joke about sleep. Uncle Reuben has visited me again. He's chopping me up even on the go. Coffee no longer gave her strength, and energy drinks in bright metal cans, alas, didn't help. And their composition was, let's be honest, lousy. When a child's life somewhere in the city hung by a thread, balancing over the abyss, Olivia knew how to pull herself together. So the doctor could only marvel. Iron nerves, iron character. Ellie recalled a phrase, either from a cartoon or some song. To herself, she mentally added, and a golden heart of enormous size, which managed to accommodate love for the whole world. After every return from a call, Livy and their driver Greg would fall asleep as soon as their heads touched the pillows on the sofas in the restroom. But the senior member of their team, Dr. Eleanor, always felt she was on duty, remaining in full readiness. Ellie wrapped her hands around the still steaming cup, blissfully inhaled the familiar aroma, and thought with pleasure, I'll come home after the shift. No need to cook anything. There are a couple of cutlets in the fridge and the rest of yesterday's mashed potatoes. My husband Vinny rushed off on a business trip this morning. Freedom for culinary parrots for 3 days. The woman stretched her legs onto the coffee table, looking at her assistant sweetly dozing under the monotonous hum of the split system. This summer was scorching. The unit had been working for days on end, as if on its last legs. Where did it get its mechanical strength? Greg snored peacefully in his sleep. Everyone at the ambulance station knew he was in love with Livy, but for some reason he couldn't bring himself to confess his feelings to her. A big guy, nearly 2 meters tall, who had been through hot spots under contract, who had lost his hollow wife after being wounded, a wife who didn't want to see a freak with a scar across his cheek in the house. In the presence of this flighty nurse, the seasoned George turned into a timid lamb, bleeding when she asked questions, breaking out in red spots at involuntary contact. Dr. Eleanor smiled, remembering how her Vinny had circled her with interest almost 20 years ago. He approached her in the park on a spring day where she was cramming Latin, preparing for a medical school exam. May I sit down? Is the spot on the bench next to you free? The pretty light-haired Ellie flashed her gray-green eyes at him and moved her thick briefcase with textbooks closer to herself. And why didn't the neighboring benches appeal to you? There are so many empty spots on them. This bench suits my pants, the tough guy Vince muttered and turned crimson all over. Then my arguments are exhausted, the girl laughed. Shall we get acquainted then? You, I see, are unlikely to decide on such an initiative yourself. Extending a palm sweaty from nervousness, the guy mumbled a little scared. Vincent, that is, you can call me Vince. He didn't shake Ellie's hand, starting to frantically wipe the moisture off his light summer trousers. Ellie lightly touched his hand with her fingertips and said, And I'm Eleanor, for short, Ellie. Sometimes friends also call me Elliebug. The nickname, which had stuck to her since childhood, instantly diffused the slightly tense atmosphere. Vinny smiled happily and said, I'd like to earn the right to call you Elliebug too, which means to become your friend, and let's use you informally. Let's do it, the girl replied. What's the point of all these bows and ceremonies at our age? That day, Ellie had to rush back to the dormitory to have a clear head for the tedious Latin exam the next day. She and Vincent agreed that he would wait for her near the institute. If she passed successfully, they would go treat themselves to ice cream and pastries at the confectionery on the boulevard. The red light on the ambulance station console flashed. The dispatcher was quickly entering something on the computer screen, simultaneously making notes in the logbook. Team for a call. Address. Gregson, I've already sent the attachment. Hurry. House on the outskirts of the city. A little one is choking. Parents can't understand the reason for the sudden attack. Quickly putting on her medical uniform, Olivia was already rushing down the stairs from the second floor. Dr. Eleanor, I grabbed the kit, even managed to shove your file folder next to it. Let's not waste time. I have a feeling this case will be unusual. Quickly settling into the van that was already running, the close-knit trio led by Dr. Eleanor set off. The night city was slowly cooling down from the hot daytime haze. George even felt that at times the softened asphalt was melting under the wheels of the old van. But there was no time to think about it. He drove carefully and quickly. If the road remained this deserted, they would arrive in about an hour. Dr. Eleanor, sitting next to the driver, thought, I should have put Olivia and Greg next to each other. For this hour, while Greg was driving the van at maximum speed, Olivia in the back compartment of the vehicle was lost in sad thoughts. She had 30 years behind her, not the simplest ones, an orphan since 3rd grade. Her family was that rare case when the father of the family, who didn't love other women, didn't disappear from the house one fine autumn evening. It all started when the woman, her mother, left. She fell in love with a young colleague cook and went after him to the ends of the earth. And why not? Wasn't going to Norilsk for 5 years as head of production in a newly opened restaurant the end of the world geographically. After such a treacherous act by his wife, Olivia's father seemed to go off the rails. He methodically went through the entire apartment, carefully searching for any images of his wife. He tore wedding photos to shreds that were in a frame on the dresser and in the wall unit behind glass. He destroyed traces of little Livy's mother's presence in the bathroom, when he accidentally knocked a well-worn bottle of perfume, forgotten by his wife, off the shelf. It shattered with a mournful crunch on the tiled floor, and the man just stood and trampled the shards with his feet, as if trampling the remnants of his love into the hard surface. The bathroom smelled persistently of Mom for a long time afterward. Olivia was only 10 years old then. She couldn't understand what was wrong with her if her mother had left her with her father without even saying goodbye. The word love was unknown to her. Her parents hadn't shown much romantic inclination in front of her. They were reserved and businesslike with each other. Later, analyzing her childhood, or rather, what she remembered of it, Olivia gave herself a word. I will elevate my chosen one to the heavens with my warm affection. I will not repeat my parents' mistakes. The girl's father drowned his sorrow in a rather peculiar way. He didn't resort to the bottle. He plunged headfirst into work. The man abandoned by his wife worked as a plumber. He was such a master craftsman that queues would form for him months in advance if you needed to install an expensive bathtub or toilet in an elite apartment without a hitch, without scratching a single luxurious side. No one around even suspected that the miracle plumber had set himself a grandiose task: to earn fabulous money, fly to his wife in Norilsk, prove to her that he was the one and only man she loved, the one you don't run away from. In a beautiful tin box that used to hold nut halva, the craftsman collected bills of various denominations, never even allowing himself to spend a couple of rubles on beer. The wad grew, became plump, pleasantly warming his hands with its weight. And at that time, the object of his dreams, up north, finding herself in an unfamiliar environment with cold realities, couldn't cope. The tragedy was so commonplace that neighbors who had recently arrived with the restaurant manager only shook their heads upon learning that she had decided to walk a couple of blocks home in a severe blizzard without the company car. Livy's mother got lost, trapped in the snow. After just a couple of steps, the snowflakes from the sky weren't descending smoothly, as she was used to. They fell like a dark, icy, piercing flock of large, predatory birds. They covered her mouth and nose. She couldn't breathe. The fatal winter struck her knees as if with a stick. Helpless, she sat down in a snowdrift. She had no strength to scream or call for help. When her husband, who began to worry an hour later, didn't find his friend at home, he organized a search. When the woman was found, she was still alive. She passed away quietly in the hospital later. Her southern body couldn't cope with pneumonia. That's how Olivia became half an orphan, but they learned what had happened much later. The criminal story involving Liv's father himself could easily have become the plot for a detective novel. After his wife's sudden flight, He worked for a year like a man possessed. Finally, he had saved up the sum that seemed to him a weighty argument for bringing his wife home. He dressed up, straightened himself up. But here was the problem. There were no flights to that distant land from the city. He first had to get to a larger airport by train. His fellow passengers in the compartment seemed like nice guys. They had elite French cognac in their bag. He couldn't even pronounce its name clearly. He had Ossetian pies from the bakery next to his house, a couple of his favorite juicy lemons, a chocolate bar. Liv's father had a notorious sweet tooth. They had a heartfelt supper. He didn't even realize he was drifting off. His thoughts became sluggish. He completely relaxed. He started telling his new friends the story of his life. Even traitorous tears welled up in his eyes. When his neighbors offered him to play a few rounds of the simple game Durak, he didn't even suspect he was so competitive. He had held cards in his hands no more than a dozen times in his life. Therefore, he reacted with enthusiasm to the remark, "Well, you're something. You've already managed to ruin us. We should play for money with you, lucky man. You'll leave us all penniless here in a flash." Who would refuse to fill their money bag so easily? They all threw 10 rubles into the card game, a ridiculous sum just for the thrill of it. Before the eyes of the ill-fated traveler, the paper cards with kings and queens swirled as if in a mystical trick. He barely had time to figure out what to throw onto the table next from the fan of colorful portraits. Liv's father lost the first 1,000 to his cheerful companions purely out of interest, for a little thrill. How this sum increased 100-fold in some hour, he couldn't even grasp. His head felt like lead, his eyes were heavy, and for some reason, he really wanted to sleep. The last thing he heard as he sank into a viscous slumber was Lyoka, then silence and darkness. For some reason, he felt he was no longer sitting in the compartment on the cozy bed made by the caring conductor, but swaying with the carriage in some narrow metal space. A sharp screech of something metallic, a cold wind, damp drops of rare rain on his face, a flight. Liv's father's body was found a couple of weeks later in the thick roadside greenery, quite by chance, between 2 settlements near the railway track. Even mushroom pickers and summer residents rarely appeared in these places, but a loving couple happened to wander into the wooded area. They rode bicycles, spent time alone without curious eyes. They were about to go home to the village. A red rag in the bushes caught their attention, which turned out to be a colorful sports bag. Then there was a long process of identifying the deceased, searching for relatives. That's when it turned out that Olivia's mother was also no longer alive. Where the money intended for the couple's reunion went, how the man ended up near the railway track, no one ever found out. A person existed and vanished for no reason. Olivia, left in the care of a kind neighbor while her father was away in Norilsk, was sent by Child Protective Services to an orphanage. And there were new walls, a new life. She was a sociable girl. Some children in state institutions withdraw. She, on the contrary, seemed to open up to her peers and caregivers. In studies and all activities, the lively Livy with a mass of light brown hair, caramel-colored brown eyes, and a slender figure was ahead of everyone. Her favorite subjects were biology and chemistry. Her hobby was participating in a series of theatrical productions. But in sports competitions and hikes, you couldn't find a better little nurse among the girls. During one of the school outings, Olivia's classmate stepped on a rusty nail. A bad spot, a bad wound. Even the gym teacher and the young caregiver were at a loss. It was over a kilometer to the camp with the experienced older doctor, Claudia Peterson. Blood spurted from the jagged hole like a fountain, scarlet, bubbling. For a few seconds, Olivia, along with the others, examined the wound. Then they couldn't even explain how the fearless girl fashioned a tourniquet above the injured area from some rope that appeared out of nowhere, and even shouted to the stunned crowd, "Note the time I tied it for Claudia Peterson, and a note to me, quick." She tore her own white cotton shirt into improvised bandages in a flash, with commands, "First aid kit to me, quick. See what disinfectants there are since some scatterbrain forgot to put a fresh batch of sterile bandages in it before the hike." A little later, the gym teacher, recovering from the shock, was already draping his windbreaker over the girl's shoulders, who was left in just a thin top. With the help of 2 students, he constructed a makeshift stretcher from tree branches. The guy could barely walk himself, limping and wincing in pain. Later, at the orphanage, in the stationary medical room, Claudia Peterson said to Olivia after the ambulance left, "I've just heard praise from the medics for such qualified first aid, but it was you who should have been sung an ode to, not me, an old crow. I didn't check before the hike that the first aid kit was poorly stocked. Shame on my gray head. Where did you pick up all this professional knowledge, child?" Olivia laughed and replied, "I don't know myself. Firstly, I love films and series about medics. Secondly, it's as if someone sits inside me and whispers, 'Take this and do that like this.'" So it happened naturally that Olivia chose her future profession not out of the necessity of mandatory study somewhere after the orphanage, but out of great sincere love. The van with the medical team strained up a small incline at the end of the street and stopped at the house at 10 Prince Street. Dr. Eleanor deftly grabbed the kit, walked quickly to the gate. Olivia, who had lingered for a couple of seconds, was already standing behind her and, as usual, covering her back. An old copper doorbell was visible on the wooden gate, and Ellie thought, "Some kind of antique. Probably hasn't worked for ages." But the doorbell didn't fail, announcing the empty street in the pre-dawn silence with a ringing voice. Confident footsteps were heard behind the gate, and the next moment it swung open. A tableau. The audience could stand and fill the surroundings with thunderous, prolonged applause. Standing before Dr. Eleanor was her husband Vincent, who had left that morning on a business trip, in person. Seeing his wife, the husband stammered, "Come in, please, the girl is in the house in the back room." Ellie and Olivia rushed to the house. Iron hammers rang in the former's head. All questions later. Right now it's just the girl and her life. But what does all this mean? Why is Vinny here? What connects him to this little one? The anteroom smelled strongly of dusty rag rugs, piled up by the front door. A general neglect, clearly reigning here constantly, caught the eye. The next room was filled with the aromas of yesterday's borscht, which had survived more than one boiling, and a little cinnamon. The little patient was lying on a small sofa. Further away, near her, a young woman of a somewhat exotic appearance was pacing nervously. Seeing the mother, Ellie was indeed a little taken aback. Acid fuchsia dreadlocks of tangled hair, eyes heavily lined with black. Below, jeans with huge fashionable rips at the knees. Above, a shapeless t-shirt with a strange pattern. The thought, like a helpless bird, fluttered in her head again. Vince? What is her Vince doing here? A lover of impeccable cleanliness and classic style in clothing. By definition, he cannot be here. But he was standing nearby and looking at her with the pitiful eyes of a sick dog. Olivia felt the absurdity of the situation, commanded in a loud voice, "Everyone step back. Let the doctor examine the girl. And you, Mom, quickly tell us what's happening and how." The little one lying on the pillow looked so much like Vince that Ellie's heart almost stopped. It definitely skipped a couple of beats. It became clear that her larynx was affected by angioedema. The girl could barely breathe. There were traces of hives on her face. The little one involuntarily reached her hand towards the unpleasant spots, trying to scratch them. Surprisingly, Vinny took it upon himself to answer the medic's questions. At this, Dr. Eleanor felt as if a bucket of ice water had been poured over her, and he immediately plunged in head first. "My daughter and I were at the circus today. There's a touring show with little artists, ponies. Our girl is crazy about horses. In the second act, just when the pony show started, Alina began to cough, and then her face started swelling before my eyes. I immediately knew something was wrong. We went to the first aid station at the circus, where they gave my daughter some antihistamine. The swelling went away instantly. We went home. At first, everything was fine at home. But then Alina started wheezing. I found sawdust from the circus arena in her hands. It turned out that when one of the ponies was giving her a ride in a circle during the intermission, she picked up a handful of chopped wooden mini blocks from the floor. She kept sniffing them to remember how beautiful her pony was. I suspect it's a severe allergy." Ellie listened to his monologue and couldn't believe her ears. "My daughter and I went home," a lump in her throat. Vince was saying all these words. How could this be? For a moment, rainbow circles swam before her eyes, and she met Olivia's gaze, and she understood. The doctor was unwell. Their Dr. Eleanor was about to faint right in the middle of this small, stuffy room. Of course, Olivia knew her boss's husband. Undoubtedly, she understood that her supervising doctor knew nothing about her husband having a child outside the marriage. With a decisive movement, the nurse seated Dr. Eleanor on a chair, waved a cotton ball soaked in ammonia under her nose, and said just a few words. Suspected quincus edema. We'll get her to the hospital. The doctor nodded resignedly. Her condition is serious. Hope bronchial spasm doesn't start. Liv, get the adrenaline and prednisolone ready. They'll buy us some time. After the injection, Alina's face began to regain its normal color. Olivia commented, Sir, don't stand there like a statue. Go outside and tell our driver to give you the stretcher. We'll transport the girl to the hospital. We need to try to avoid intubation. We wouldn't want to put a tube down the trachea of such a little one. Dr. Eleanor acted like a robot, automatically. She only came to herself when they were driving in the van with Vincent, sitting on either side of the girl. Alina's breathing was still intermittent, but had noticeably evened out. Vincent didn't take his anxious eyes, full of anguish, off the child. And Ellie remembered something else. After their first date, when she had successfully passed her Latin exam, their relationship developed rapidly. A week later, they couldn't live a day without each other. Both sets of parents unconditionally liked them. They got married after her 4th year of university and moved into Vincent's grandmother's apartment. The lively old woman dashed off to her younger sister in the village, where she enthusiastically took up flower gardening. She couldn't be lured back to the city for love or money now. Ellie and Vince lived soul to soul, getting into arguments or starting to figure things out. That wasn't them. Always complete unanimity in everything. The tough guy Vincent worked as a swimming coach at a children's sports school. Ellie Bug was successfully finishing medical school and was planning to do her residency. Only she couldn't choose a specialization. She joked, I see myself as an ophthalmologist in a starched white coat, and an ENT doctor in an office with lots of shining metal instruments looks excellent. Fate forced her to make a choice. After defending her diploma, as if on some command from above, now you can, Ellie got pregnant. 9 months later, another tough guy was born. Their son, Arthur. Their Artie. Their love and their joy. He developed exactly as expected. As the happy head of the family often joked, time to sit, Artie sat confidently. Time to walk, he toddled briskly. Ellie had somewhat neglected medicine at that time, always trying to spend more time with her son, as if intuition told her, things wouldn't be this carefree for long. Trouble knocked on their otherwise prosperous family's door when Arthur was 3 years old. Eleanor's mentor, who always told the young woman she had abilities in medicine, hinted that in another 6 months, no medical facility would be happy to have her. This profession loves those who don't get distracted by themselves and constantly improve. Even before that, upon learning she would soon be a mother, Eleanor sharply changed her plans regarding her specialization choice. She designated the smallest children, infants, newborns, as her future patients. She decided to become a neonatologist. She meticulously studied all sorts of pathologies in little ones who had just come into the world. She spent time in the pediatric intensive care unit. And then her fervor subsided. Artie occupied all her thoughts and time. To return to her chosen field of medicine, Ellie needed to immerse herself in the thick of current events in the department where a spot for a budding pediatrician was found for her. Big guy Artie went off to kindergarten. Vince continued his classes with his trainees in the sports section. Everything in their family was flowing along the planned course. A couple of months later, Artie's kindergarten teacher asked Eleanor to stop by her Metoditsky cabinet, methodology room, after work. Here she shared her observations and concerns with the boy's mother. But first she asked, Have you noticed anything strange about your son lately? Ellie raised her eyebrows in surprise, her amazed eyes wide open. My husband and I both work a lot. We mostly see Artie in the evenings. But he seems healthy and cheerful. What exactly has you concerned? We were preparing for the group's morning performance. The little one's folk dances weren't turning out right. Arthur did another circle around the music room with his little partner, suddenly turned pale, and sat down on a child's chair. I didn't pay much attention to it then, but your son has been stopping in his tracks more and more often. It started to seem to me that a blue tinge appears around his lips at that moment. Yesterday we had a routine checkup with the local pediatrician from our district hospital. She advised us to show the boy to a pediatric cardiologist. I'm a doctor myself, a pediatrician too. I couldn't have missed anything in my son, Ellie replied sharply to the teacher, and to herself she thought, or could I have? Without putting it off, the very next day she took Artie to her own department. The doctor's verdict was stunning. Your son has a rare form of heart defect that usually only manifests around the age of 3 or 4. The only way out is urgent surgery. Otherwise, he won't live for 6 months. His condition will worsen every day. Such a complex surgical intervention is impossible in our city. Experience in performing such operations has been gained in Moscow. Cardiosurgeons in Germany, Switzerland, Israel would be good in this case. Ellie and Arthur walked home slowly. She kept feeling that her boy was about to get worse, that his little heart wouldn't cope. Vince rushed from the sports school as soon as she called him, and she kept studying and studying textbooks, notes, medical literature. According to everything, in their case, the outcome, whether favorable or fatal, was like a seesaw, 50-50. Where to find that point of balance that would make the seesaw tip in their favor? The cost of the rare and complex operation in Moscow seemed astronomical. Time flew. Ellie and Vincent couldn't raise the necessary sum. Even selling the old grandmother's apartment with her permission and moving into a one-room apartment on the outskirts didn't balance the scales. When one of the charitable foundations intervened in the seemingly hopeless situation, things moved off the dead center. Finally, the operation and treatment were paid for, tickets to Moscow were bought, and things were packed. Arthur died on the operating table. The seesaw refused to tip in favor of their family happiness and well-being. There was no negligence, no medical error, no serious prerequisites, except for the severe illness itself. Dr. Eleanor, as a pediatrician, understood all this perfectly, but her heart froze the moment the surgeon came out of the operating room and spread his hands. Without words, they both understood everything at once. No cry, no sigh. They just tightened the embrace in which they seemed to stand the whole time their son was being saved, under the cold glow of bright fluorescent lamps. They returned home devastated. Ellie kept repeating, "It's Time's fault. We lost it while trying to raise money for the operation. If we had come to Moscow earlier, everything would have been fine." Then she took retraining courses for pediatric ambulance doctors. It became important for her to manage to save at least someone else's child. That's when she first said her motto phrase to her husband. "We are always responsible for everything. It's just that some people live their whole lives without understanding this." 2 years after Arthur's death, Vincent brought up the subject of another baby with Eleanor. She herself couldn't explain why her feelings were like this now. She didn't want to have another baby, didn't want to have another child. From now on, she wanted to dedicate all her efforts, abilities, and skills only to children in trouble, sick, suffering, but not her own. Vince accepted it, didn't bring up the subject again, didn't hint. He was there, completely her own, dear to the point of pain. And now they were driving side by side with his daughter from some strange, incomprehensible girl. Dr. Eleanor didn't even want to call her mother mentally. As if in a delirium, only one thought dominated deep down. What could her husband possibly have in common with this freak show? On a distant June day, when Vinny was strolling through the avenues of the local park, it wouldn't have crossed his mind that on one of the benches, fate was waiting for him in the form of a girl with gorgeous gray-green eyes whose beauty was unmatched in the whole wide world. The pretty person, contrary to his masculine understanding, ran a ballpoint pen over her lips, which were whispering in concentration, twirled a thick strand of hair around her finger, wrinkled her nose, chewed a sausage sandwich, washing it down with some drink from a plastic bottle, and again turned the pages. Moreover, she did all this simultaneously, without getting confused about the sequence of actions. Vince stopped in his tracks and, however dramatic it may sound, was lost. He fell in love at first sight. His feet carried him to the bench and the girl on their own. And then he was a little flustered, so he blurted out the first thing that came to mind. She didn't hesitate to speak her mind, suggested getting acquainted herself, and didn't refuse to go with him to an ice cream parlor the next day. In any love, family story, there are two faces, two participants, two heroes. If someone were to write down Vincent's and Eleanor's memories, there would be two similar stories. They understood that they loved and wanted to be together. They were close, friendly, understood each other. They lived, waited, and then raised Arthur together. Everything was the same, shared. Everything was 50-50. Together they faced a misfortune unlike any other. Their son was gone. They remained. Against the laws of nature, the elders outlived the younger. That trip to the enticing, picturesque resort of Sochi, which was actively preparing for the upcoming Olympic Games, was somehow unusual from the very beginning. There was still a year and a half until the landmark global competitions. Construction was in full swing everywhere in the city. They even tested out a new hotel and cafe on the coach and his team in Krasnaya Poliana, which were intended for foreign guests. Having admired the grandeur of the Caucasus Mountains, swum to their heart's content in the Black Sea, and then won another competition, everyone was going home happy. When buying tickets, the following fact emerged. At that time, too many professionals from all over the country were traveling to Sochi and back. Travel documents became scarce. The coach's ticket had to be bought in a first-class sleeper car in a two-berth compartment. His neighbor turned out to be a young woman. As it turned out later, she was going home to his city for vacation. Her ticket was also bought at the last moment, snub-nosed, blue-eyed, and giggly. And as for being a little short on brains, always babbling some nonsense, well, Vincent wasn't going to raise children with her. Athletic build, with a well-formed muscular physique and a serious gaze of inquisitive brown eyes, he was always attractive to women. But this didn't interest him at all. He was tied to his Ellie bug by shared joys and sorrows, as if by ropes. He paid little attention to other young women, even if they showed him clear attention. The girl in the compartment was about 10 years younger than him. When he entered, she was engrossed in chewing a potato pie, washing it down with cola. She nodded hello, introduced herself. Teresa, I'm going on vacation. I've been painting on sites for almost 9 months without days off. The foreman allocated a whole 2 weeks for vacation. Go on, sit down. Why are you standing there like a post? We still have to hang around here for almost a day. Stunned by such a monologue, Vincent sat down on the second bunk. The train peacefully set off, and the beautiful Sochi station floated past the window. 10 minutes later, his guys stormed into his compartment, immediately starting to tease the coach from all sides. Boss, maybe we should switch places. Such a girl is traveling with you. Don't disgrace the team's victories on all fronts here. It was easy with Tess. She didn't flirt, didn't simper, didn't play games with him at all. She treated him to pies, took one of his sandwiches, went to get coffee from the conductor for both of them, waving it off. Some things are just part of a woman's job description. I'm already 23. I just look like a shrimp because I'm short. And then we're already respectable. The passenger train glided smoothly along the even rails. The day outside the window turned into an inky night with rare, bright sparkles of stars in the sky. Vincent and Teresa discussed the latest Hollywood premieres, the morals of show business stars, and the beauties of Sochi. Then they lazily told each other a couple of jokes they could remember. After that, the conversation didn't flow, and they decided to go to sleep. Vincent leafed through some railway newspapers for a while. Teresa rustled the pages of a detective novel. Boring. Without a word, they both lay on their sides with their backs to their fellow passenger and pretended to be concentrating on falling asleep. After half an hour of torment, Vince actually dozed off and woke up to hands stroking his shoulders. Don't be scared, brave coach. You're brutal. You're too much. It's hard to resist. Vincent jerked on the bunk, stood up abruptly, and turned to face Tess. What are you doing? Your fellow passenger, I told you I'm married. Or will you have a child with me, Vinny? Or will you never stray from your wife? Of course, the man growled angrily. But inside, the predator's excitement had already awakened. Teresa instantly caught the change in his mood. Well, and then what happened, happened. In the morning, they barely spoke. No, I won't have coffee, thank you. Even the bold Teresa from the evening before didn't look at Vincent again, as if she was ashamed. In their city, they parted ways on different sides of the platform. His memories of that night were strange. For some reason, he didn't even consider that incident cheating on his wife. And then something unexpected happened. In the middle of autumn, Vincent was locking the men's changing room doors as usual when the security guard from the lower hall called him. "Vince, some girl is looking for you here." Going downstairs, Vince was greatly surprised to see his fellow passenger from the Sochi train on the doorstep of the children's sports school. She beckoned him closer with a nod of her head and said through clenched teeth, "I've had so many partners, but to get pregnant like this after just one night, that's never happened before. Listen, coach, abortions are expensive these days. You'll have to help me out with money." Vincent couldn't believe his ears. He could become a father again. He could have a son or a daughter. He would give half his life for such an opportunity. Quickly grabbing Teresa by the elbow, he dragged her around the corner of the building to the summer sports ground. There he sat her down on the bleachers near the football field and said loudly and clearly, "You will have this child for me, and I will be there. Not as your husband, don't even hope for that, but as his or her father. Just dare to harm the little one in any way, and you'll regret it." Teresa resisted such an outcome to her interesting situation, crying out to him desperately, "So who are you to make me spend my youth and life on your offspring? Found yourself a surrogate mother? A free one? Maybe someone will ask me to marry them later, and I'll have your baggage?" They sat down at the negotiating table again and discussed the terms. Vincent would help Teresa financially with everything, would come to her at any moment upon her first request. They would decide the child's fate after the birth. In return, she would lead a healthy lifestyle for the remaining 7 months and wouldn't do anything that could harm the future baby. They found out they would be parents to a girl after the next ultrasound. Teresa unexpectedly softened. Didn't want a boy, but a girl. "I'll think about whether to keep her myself or give her to you, Daddy, as a gift. You were happy, right?" Vince looked at her and thought, how could I have been so weak on the train to be next to such a woman for a few hours? He kept preparing for a conversation with Ellie, wanted to tell her everything, confess, but couldn't bring himself to and put off the explanation for the future. Let the girl come into the world, and then he would definitely confess everything to the woman he loved. Alina was born quickly, healthy, without any complications. 5 days later, Vincent was already picking Teresa up from the maternity hospital. The lively painter quieted down and surprisingly treated the little one with care and tenderness. Either her maternal instinct had awakened, or it was the fact that the girl was pretty, quiet, and calm, as if she sensed there was something wrong with her coming into the world. Dad and Mom don't live together. There was no normal, in the generally accepted sense, family around her. 3 months after his daughter's birth, Vincent suggested Teresa arrange the adoption papers with the subsequent transfer of the little one to him, so that the woman would be free of any obligations again. The refusal was unexpectedly sharp. Moreover, Teresa insisted that he tell his wife nothing. Otherwise, she'd lie down and die, but she'd keep him away from Alina. At first, Vince was torn by doubts. He wanted to involve lawyers to win back his daughter, and he kept a watchful eye on whether Tess was treating the girl well. There was nothing to fault. A master of her painting trade, she even managed to save a decent sum for the child, so she couldn't be caught on a financial hook either. Time passed. Vincent got used to visiting his second home, where Alina invariably greeted him with joyful squeals. Sometimes they went for walks together, sometimes they even had lunch or dinner like big adults, father, mother, and daughter. Eleanor fanatically buried herself in work, taking extra shifts. She paid not the slightest attention to her husband's absences, but if they happened to be home together during rare hours, she was almost her old self, kind, affectionate, attentive. The ambulance van, tired from its night vigils, slowed to a stop near the emergency room of the Children's City Hospital. A moment later, two burly orderlies were already carrying the stretcher with Alina to the examination room. The doctors bustled about, immediately reassuring everyone that the girl's life was not in danger. Dr. Eleanor's team's mission was complete. The girl was brought in without incident. Vincent stayed with his daughter. Ellie had to return to the ambulance station. Only later that evening would her husband honestly tell her everything about those events on the train, which had already become distant. By then, Ellie would have almost calmed down, surprised that she hadn't considered her husband's brief affair a crime against their family. It was as if she felt Vincent's yearning for this girl, in whom his dream of having a child was embodied. People have different fates. The heavens help people find the happiness of fatherhood in different ways. After that, everything even became somewhat amusing for them. Eleanor advised her husband on what doll to buy for the girl's discharge, bought her sweets, birthday presents, New Year's gifts. Only once did she ask, "Vince, why does Alina's mother have such a strange appearance?" Vincent explained that such metamorphoses in Teresa's appearance had started happening recently. Neither of them suspected then what Alina's mother's pink dreadlocks and mannerisms would lead to. The thing was, Tess had fallen in love with a new painter in their crew. The man called himself a free nomadic artist. In breaks, he painted her portrait on the wall and then immediately painted over it with the required monochrome layer of colored paint. Tess was smitten, got dreadlocks just like his. He suggested the shade. The free artist didn't ask her out on dates, didn't gaze languidly into her eyes, didn't shower her with gifts, didn't even hint at getting closer somewhere in a secluded corner of the construction site. He captivated her with his bohemian spirit, his charm that showed even through the beautifully cut holes in his jeans, the refinement and aristocracy that shone through in his every gesture, movement, turn of his head. What wind had blown this unrecognized genius to their construction site, Tess didn't ask herself. She just prayed that this Mary Poppins in male form wouldn't disappear from their simple horizon one fine day. Now she imitated her idol in everything. She dressed like her gifted idol, smoked long thin cigarettes like her god, consumed delicacies like her prince, sushi and wasabi for lunch, a glass of Italian wine and elite cheese with mold for dinner. She paid less and less attention to Alina, only pretending to be an ideal mother when Vincent appeared. He, however, felt no anxiety about the drastic changes in Tess. By the Christmas holidays, Tess sensed that her beloved was getting ready to take flight. In breaks between falling into the abyss of love, the nomad told her that he never stayed in one place for more than 2 to 3 months. He got bored. He dropped out of art college, where he learned his trade, in his 3rd year. The urge to change places, to unknown lands, won out. Teresa rushed off after the object of her love 2 weeks after melancholy appeared in his eyes. But first, she prepared well. She already knew that Vincent had no secrets left from his wife, so she invited both of them to a cafe to discuss an important matter. Ordering coffee and pastries for everyone, to, as she thought, sweeten the pill, she didn't beat around the bush. "I've met the man of my life. That's what people call such love, I think. I'm ready to follow him to the ends of the earth. Alina is now superfluous to me. God knows I wasn't always such a bad mother to her. I was attached to her in my own way. Now I want to sort out my personal life. If you want, Vince, do the paperwork. I'll give you the daughter and go my own way." Ellie was in shock at this offer. She wasn't at all against Vincent's daughter living with them. But how can a mother just give up her child like that? The image of her son Artie swam before her eyes. Her heart was pierced by something sharp and profound. "If only you had come back, my dear, I would never have given you away to anyone." Aloud, however, she said, "We are always responsible for our loved ones. Vince, you haven't even said a word, and I, as always, am rushing ahead of everyone. We agree, Teresa, to take your girl into our family. Do the necessary paperwork. We'll sign everything and gather all the papers on our end." For the adoption, easily bypassing all sorts of bureaucratic obstacles, Vincent and Eleanor adopted Alina in the shortest possible time. The girl always adored her father. Her mother's departure was explained to her as a vital necessity, and she quickly found a common language with Auntie Ellie. Crowded but content. Now in their little one-room apartment, the voice of a little Belle was always heard, invariably participating in all household chores. Alina hung laundry on the balcony with her father, helping Auntie Ellie. And then the female half of the family baked pancakes in the kitchen and called the head of the family to come quickly for tea. This story could have ended here, but it's not for us to decide how fate will decree. It had already prepared new trials for these people. Another team was supposed to go to the call about the house that had collapsed. Someone in the heavenly office had decreed otherwise. A nurse from a neighboring crew slipped right on the steps of the station. The first frosts had just arrived in the city, and everyone had slightly forgotten about the treachery of the black ice. Somewhere on the other side of the city, near the collapsed house, the emergency team was awaited by the unfortunate victims, and the medical worker's leg was swelling before their eyes. Even without an X-ray, it was clear. It was a fracture. Dr. Eleanor's team was urgently reassigned to the accident site. As always, the composed Livy, Greg, indispensable on any type of road, and the focused Ellie. Everyone's here. We can leave. Even Liv doesn't argue about riding in the back, but quickly climbs into the seat with Greg in the cab. So, with Greg in the cab, no time for arguments and bickering. A couple of days ago, Ellie and Liv had a serious conversation in an unofficial setting. They are close friends and use informal address. They only keep up the hierarchy at work. The doctor started the dialogue, but she didn't scold her subordinate for mistakes at work, but chided her about Greg. "Don't you have a heart, Liv? The whole station is gossiping that Greggy is pining for you, and you're acting like a stranger. After all, you're good in every way, outwardly and inwardly. And as for the scar on his face, that only enhances a man." "So what are you suggesting, Ellie Bug? He acts like a devil at any touch from me. Okay, am I contagious or something? He touches me by accident and jumps away. How am I supposed to understand such a reaction to me? And you say he's in love. That's all nonsense." Now Olivia was riding next to Greg and again involuntarily admired his manly profile. The scar cutting across his eyebrow, snaking down to his beautifully defined lips, no longer scared her. Greg was attractive with that kind of masculine beauty that promises protection and strength to whoever is by his side. The only mystery remained that he so deliberately avoided her. If he loves her, why like this? Greg was afraid to approach Nurse Livy closer than a meter. He loved this giggly person too much to offend her with an involuntary display of his masculine interest. And even now, as soon as Olivia briefly turned away to the window, he would cast a lightning-fast glance at her, to again admire her unassuming but so lovely beauty. When the nurse turned her head back to its original position, Greg, as if nothing had happened, sat straight, looking at the road. A crowd of onlookers had gathered in front of the house where the collapse happened on the third, the very top floor of a rather old building. It buzzed like 100 agitated bumblebees, filled with rumors, fed on alarming reports from the rescuers, only to buzz again at full strength. "Did you hear? A girl is pinned down by something heavy on the first floor. She's screaming in agony, and our brave rescuers can't get to her yet." Hearing this information, the thin little Dr. Eleanor commanded, "Liv, prepare a syringe with painkiller. I'll try to crawl to the injured little one." At her words, Greg and Liv turned around simultaneously. "You can't do that, boss. Until the rescuers give the go-ahead, the building could collapse at any moment." "No time to be afraid of anything," the brave woman replied. "There's a child alone, scared, in pain. What's the point of our ambulance service, then, if it's as slow as a turtle?" With a syringe of medicine in her outstretched hand, Dr. Eleanor rushed towards the building, next to whose wall firefighters in shiny helmets and emergency services guys were busy at the same time. "Ma'am, where are you going?" "I'll try to crawl to the girl, give her a pain-killing shot. I'm an ambulance doctor." "The passage is too narrow there. None of our guys could crawl under." "But I'll try anyway." Building debris, chunks of fallen plaster, blue streaks of paint from the stairwell wall, more debris, and endless, biting dust. Ellie was first forced to get on her knees, then moved almost by crawling, mentally thanking her husband for making her keep in shape for so many years, going swimming twice a week, going for morning runs with him. At the end of the crawl, she finally saw the girl who was pinned down by a metal door from one of the apartments. The little one's legs were pressed down by a heavy rectangular slab as if by a press, and for some reason were sticking out towards the exit, as if the child had been running and disaster had caught them on the move. She turned back and shouted loudly, "Two thin men can easily fit through here. The girl is pinned by the door, but I'm already giving her a painkiller, a sedative injection." "Don't shout, for God's sake," someone whispered back. "Loud noises are dangerous in such a dilapidated building right now." A couple of minutes later, the little one quieted down. Ellie began to push the metal barrier into the apartment with her shoulder. With difficulty, but the massive object moved. There were rustling sounds from behind, and the woman whispered, "The girl is relaxed from the shot. She's gone limp. Pull her by the legs and I'll continue pushing the door the other way." Working together, things went more energetically. The men pulled the girl towards the exit through the narrow labyrinth. The way back no longer seemed so unknown to them. Ellie hesitated for just a couple of minutes. Outside, people never understood what happened next. A crash. The building began to fold in on itself like a house of cards before their eyes. Only two young men managed to scramble out from under its arches with the girl in their arms. Dr. Eleanor, a pediatric ambulance doctor known to many in the city, was buried under the debris forever. The calm nurse Olivia, who always quickly focused in difficult situations, screamed hysterically, rushing to Greg, who had already grabbed her in his arms and began stroking her head like a little girl. It seemed to both of them that some greedy monster, opening its toothy maw with stone debris, had just swallowed their Ellie bug before their eyes. It lured Dr. Eleanor, who had bravely stepped inside with the syringe, swallowed her without choking. People bustled around. Someone said that the fate of 4 more residents was unknown. Ellie's widowed team just stood in the middle of the chaos, tightly embracing each other. A little later, having ascertained that their presence was no longer needed, they walked to the van, not letting go of each other's hands. They now had to go to Vincent's to tell him and the little one Alina the bitter news. 2 weeks passed. Greg and Olivia now had a new doctor boss, an elderly pediatrician who had transferred to the emergency service from the city children's clinic. The silent, even somewhat stern man was a qualified and experienced specialist. But the nurse and the driver felt that the soul had left their close-knit team. Everything was seemingly as usual, and yet nothing was right. They didn't feel like going to work. That day, when Dr. Eleanor was gone before their eyes, they immediately rushed to her home. Alina was at kindergarten. Vince was packing his bag to go to his next training session. Olivia had never before seen emotions manifest on a person's face upon hearing sad news in such a way. After their account of Ellie Bug's last minutes, darkness spread across Vince's face. Just a moment ago, his eyes had been alive, shining, but then the light in them went out, and his skin took on an ashen gray hue. How to find words to comfort someone in such a situation? Everything said would seem empty and unnecessary, all consolations useless. Olivia and Greg understood that they were superfluous in this desert scorched by grief. They didn't want to part. Some thick, strong thread now bound this couple, who had just witnessed a terrible, hopeless tragedy. They came back to Liv's apartment together after their shift. It seemed to both of them now that no words were needed to explain to each other how much time they had lost. Olivia made something to eat, as if she had done it for her and Greg 1,000 times before. Both of them, after the severe stress, suddenly found such a ravenous appetite that a huge pan of fried potatoes, generously covered in eggs, was eaten in just 5 minutes. Before, Greg had always thought, if Olivia were near, he would pounce on her like a starving wolf. It all happened differently. He felt such tenderness for this woman that a little more, and he would melt like ice cream in hot weather. Greg felt such happiness inside that it seemed all those long torments of waiting had never happened. When Livy drifted off into a restless sleep, he still couldn't fall into a saving slumber. He checked, wondering if he was imagining it. She was indeed sleeping on his shoulder, his woman, his dream. his vision, and he was very struck by the warmth with which Liv touched his ugly scar on his face, how she kissed the curved line, looked into his eyes. Did he like her kind caress? And she behaved as if a hero, a protector, a support was by her side. He immediately remembered the disgust on his wife's face when he returned from the hospital after being wounded in a hot spot. They didn't utter a single word like, "I love you," "I need you." Everything had already been said long ago in their story, and now they were simply proving to each other that it wasn't a mistake, that it was worth enduring and waiting for everything to happen exactly as it was happening now. In the morning, Olivia said calmly, "Greg, you should go home and get some things for the first while. My apartment is closer to work and it's more spacious there. Later we'll decide what to do with your place. I'd combine our efforts and trade our properties for something bigger." Greg hadn't known before what quiet family comfort was like. He and his wife had lived in perpetual separation. He always felt a certain restlessness, a certain coldness within the home walls. Even though he was with that woman of his, a persistent feeling that they lived apart never left him. That's why he was constantly rushing off to work. With his Livy, everything was different from the start. A certain confidence appeared that he was needed and important, that even when he goes to the supermarket for groceries at his girlfriend's request, she manages to miss him and greets him so warmly at the door as if he were returning from some faraway journeys each time. Vincent lived as if in a daze after Ellie's tragic death. In the morning, he mechanically made sandwiches and coffee for himself, while simultaneously stirring milk porridge on the stove for little Alina. The girl became his salvation, his solace, his light in the window. In his free time, he couldn't bear to stay in the tiny apartment at all. Both his and Ellie's parents immediately declined sharply after the grief that struck the family, almost simultaneously turning into helpless old people. Both older families began to seek solace in working the land. They fanatically planted everything in the garden and vegetable patch, finding in this work, if not joy, then oblivion. They tried not to think, not to remember. They stubbornly wouldn't even take their granddaughter for the weekend. And they couldn't cope anymore with the lively, curious one who asked 100 questions a minute. On weekends, Vincent took his daughter on impromptu trips. They would go somewhere further away to a river, set up a tent, wandered around the steppe, gathering wildflowers for Ellie's grave. On the way back, they always stopped by the cemetery. Vince would sit on the wooden bench and talk at length with the beloved woman who had passed away prematurely. He slowly recounted how the week had gone for him and Alina, sometimes proudly boasted that his trainees had again won another prize at prestigious competitions. Ellie looked at him from the photograph with her gray-green eyes and smiled with that smile of hers from which she loved to declare her life motto: "We are responsible for everything. If you commit to something, be good enough to see it through to the victorious end." After visiting the graveyard, Vince felt a little better for a while. It eased up. He also noticed a new trait in himself. Carefree women laughing on the street irritated him. If he came across such a cheerful, giggly woman, he would watch her go and think angrily, "I wonder, darling, would you have stepped so recklessly under the ruins of a building hanging by a thread if a stranger's child was crying there?" Dark vexation enveloped him. Why they all continued to live, while his Ellybug was gone from him forever. Alina instantly grew up in her very young years, turning into a kind of wise old grandma. She never whined after kindergarten. Buckwheat porridge with sausages, the best food for dinner. That the Cinderella fairy tale read to her for the first time at night was a new discovery every time. She wasn't afraid to stay home alone if Vincent had to leave urgently. After such absences, she always asked solicitously, "Tired? Shall I put the kettle on? Let me take your dirty socks to the bathroom." She had already lost a second mother, but she didn't ask Vince any questions like, "When is Mom coming back?" or "Why are we living alone?" They were fine even in this orphaned solitude, always understood each other with half a word, with half a glance. Sometimes Greg and Liv would drop by in the evenings with pastries or a cake. Then they would all have noisy tea parties together. They remembered Ellie with a light sadness. All four at the table loved her, All four missed her very much. Sometimes Vincent agonizingly wanted to leave this city far behind, where everything reminded him of the happy past. But where would he get a new, well-trained team of athletes? Besides, his wife's grave is here, and the old folks are nearby. His desire didn't align with reality, no matter how much he tried. They decided to mark the anniversary of Dr. Eleanor's death at a cafe. The brave doctor's former colleagues took care of everything themselves. Vincent, Alina, and the parents were brought to the place where everything was already ready. Greg and Olivia had recently gotten married, deciding not to delay the officialization of their relationship any longer. Their family was expecting an addition in a couple of months. They had also recently moved into a new apartment, having bought it, as planned, with the money from selling their bachelor pads. Many warm words were said about Ellie at the memorial table. No one wanted to leave quickly. This time, even Vince's parents expressed a strong desire to take the girl home with them for a couple of days. They genuinely missed the little one. Having seen off the last guests who had gathered to honor his wife's memory, Vince wandered home through the same park where they had once met. The same bench in the shade of an already very old chestnut tree, the same avenues with bushes and flowers, shielding loving couples from curious eyes in the far corner of the path. Some group was fooling around, loud enough for the whole area. There were 3 young men. Together, they surrounded a girl, not letting her take a step. Darkness fell over Vincent's eyes for a moment. The thug's victim was an exact copy of his Ellie bug in her youth, a thin reed with a mass of hair falling onto her shoulders. The girl stood helplessly between the broad-shouldered guys, clutching an elegant handbag to herself. The guys grinned predatorily and tightened the ring around her more and more. Vince quickened his pace. "Hey guys, doesn't it seem like the lady doesn't want to talk to you?" One of the young predators eased up, turned his head slightly, hissed. "Sir, you should just keep walking past. We'll sort things out with our friend here ourselves, without outside interference." A cold shiver of rage ran through Vincent's body, quickly turning into the furious inferno of a volcano. It was infinitely important for him now to save this young girl, not to let the insolent individuals mock her. Even if the whole group had known each other for a long time, and well, even if she wasn't really in danger, it was important for him to fight them off and take her away from these arrogant guys, far away. "Looks like the quick uncle didn't understand us. Go on your way, random passerby. We're all friends here, and you're an outsider." Vincent glanced at the girl. Despair splashed in her green eyes. She was silent, but her gaze pleaded for help. Vince couldn't be mistaken that she was uncomfortable with the unpleasant scene unfolding here. "The girl is coming with me," he issued an ultimatum to the guys, "or you'll regret that our paths crossed." "Just look at this funny man." One of the trio stepped away from his friends and started pacing near Vince. "He doesn't understand orders the first time. He's a feisty one." The guy quickly shoved his hand into his pockets, pulled out a small knife from there, which glinted steel in the light of the street lamp. "How do you like this argument, noble knight, who decided to save the honor of a lady completely unknown to him? How do you prefer? Should I tickle your throat with this toy, or shall we see if our beauty likes such games?" Vince, who often dropped in on the neighbors who rented one of the halls in their sports school for martial arts classes, was absolutely not afraid of attacks from the youngsters. Right now, it was important to him that they didn't touch her, a copy of Ellie Bug from the time of their first dates. The guys unanimously dropped their victim, who, instead of fleeing the scene, froze in place like a statue and started approaching from all sides. But this turn of events only spurred Vincent on. He had only had a couple of shots of vodka that evening. His hatred for the scumbags who thought they were the masters of this park, his and Ellie's park, and that everything was permitted to them, did the rest. How much older was he than them? About 10 years, no more. They could almost be considered one generation. But there was so much cruelty in his opponent's eyes. Such a pull towards lawlessness, towards permissiveness was felt, that it didn't fit within any bounds of decency in the coach's understanding. The fight began, sharp and fierce. The guy with the knife almost immediately seriously scratched his shoulder with the sharp blade, as if teasing and inviting more. The strongest, broadest-shouldered of the three attackers looked into Vincent's eyes with a smile on his face, trying to defeat him morally at the initial stage. The lump of a girl just stood aside, her mouth open, either from fear or confusion. "All right, scram!" Vince shouted at her. "I don't want to see hide nor hair of you here in a second." But the young lady wasn't going to give up. She shook her head vigorously. "I won't leave you alone with them. They've been harassing me for a long time, and now they got a chance when they caught me alone without friends, and late at night, too. We all study together at the university. The boys are from the elite, golden youth, and I'm from the orphanage, like a red rag to a bull for them. They're all curious about what life was like in my restless childhood, my youth in a state institution. We didn't leave our own in trouble. I'll be right here." Vincent was so distracted by the girl's monologue that he missed a couple of solid blows to the ribs. Something crunched inside. A fracture, no doubt, he thought with vexation. At this time, the guy with the knife decided to entertain himself differently. He jumped up behind his fellow student, pressed the blade, which again gleamed in the lamplight, against her tender cheek. "So you say, my little kitten, you're not used to abandoning your own? And if I tickle your throat right now, will you bolt across the park?" The girl, who to everyone's surprise had been as if in suspended animation until then, didn't faint here. She turned to the guy, which immediately caused a thin trickle of blood to run down her cheek, and shouted, "How you annoyed me back at the university, you creeps. Aren't you nobodies without your daddies and mummies? Empty space, a zero without a stick. What can you do in this life by yourself? Take away your expensive car, your trinkets, your bank card. What do you know about having to survive in a wild pack of teenagers?" No one involved in the fight expected such resistance from the pretty student. The guys went completely wild, their faces even darkened with uncontrollable rage. Putting the knife away from the girl's throat, her opponent joined his friends. Now they surrounded Vincent from all sides with a mass of bodies and faces distorted by malice. He himself couldn't really remember later how he pushed their supposed leader in the chest with all his might. He did some kind of gymnastic somersault, his feet leaving the ground, and fell backward flat on his back. The back of his head hit the hard curb bordering the avenue. A ruby stain of thick blood instantly began to spread under the young man's head. Vince, who had taken his guys from the sections to the first aid station so many times when they got injured, instantly understood that things were bad. He habitually placed his finger on his opponent's neck where the living pulse usually beat. There was no pulse. What followed was like a blur. The girl was the first to come to her senses. "Call an ambulance, call the police, quick, nobody leave!" The guys began frantically pulling out their phones, calling somewhere one after another. Parents, services, some important acquaintances. Vince sat on the curb next to the guy and thought frantically, "Alina is at home with the parents who wanted to look after her today. They'll probably arrest me now. What will happen to the girl?" He quickly beckoned the young student over. "What's your name? I'm going to need your help." "I'm Faith. Tell me what to do." "I'm Vincent. Here's a note with my address, the keys to the apartment, and the phone number of my friends George and Olivia. My 5-year-old daughter is with her grandparents right now. Pick her up and give her to my friends. They'll take care of her." When the police, the ambulance, and a bunch of other people arrived, Vincent was somehow completely calm. As the saying goes, never say never to prison or beggary. Apparently, it was his turn to find out what state-provided bread and life in the zone were like. Look how many important gentlemen have shown up, already giving orders to the servicemen and some guards who arrived with them. Perhaps Vince was incredibly lucky that they immediately took him to the police car, otherwise the dogs unleashed from their chains, surrounding the high-ranking father of the deceased guy, would have dealt with him right there on the spot. Faith, whom he had saved from the scumbags who knew no bounds, kept hovering near Vince. She even managed to show the ambulance crew the cut on her neck to get a certificate about the incident later. She kept babbling and babbling something to the detectives, to the investigator. Their whole disheveled group was brought to the police station together. They immediately took all his documents and cell phone. While they were dealing with him, Faith, like a quick little mouse, darted aside and made a few phone calls. Then, meeting Vince's eyes, she gave him a thumbs up, meaning the mechanism for caring for his daughter had been set in motion. She turned out to be quite the desperate go-getter, who managed to be everywhere and get everything done. At the trial, she presented everything in such vivid detail that the wealthy, successful relatives of those involved in the fight turned pale from such frankness. She found witnesses who testified that the trio of Golden Boys had been harassing and humiliating her for a long time. Everyone in their group respected her, while they collectively disliked these fellow students. The picture for the victim wasn't the most favorable. Undoubtedly, absolutely, without any doubt, Vincent absolutely did not want to harm the boy who was just starting his life. It was too cruel a boomerang even for such an explosive youngster. It just happened as it happened. He was given 5 years in a general regime colony for exceeding the limits of self-defense. Faith's fervent participation greatly helped the judge make such an optimal decision for him. The prosecution insisted on 8 years of imprisonment and kept trying to shift the court hearing towards a different article. In the end, the judge still leaned towards the first option. Vince didn't really know how Greg and Olivia managed to arrange things with Child Protective Services, but his Alina was given into their care for the duration of his time in the zone. During the investigation, Benjamin, was born into their family, pink-cheeked Benny. The ambulance team in the city turned out to have connections. After all, they often saved the children of not only ordinary people, but also important officials. When Olivia was allowed a visit, she was able to calm Vince down. "Don't worry, buddy. Alina will be fine with us. You and Ellie aren't strangers to us. I'll write to you about her life and times regularly and with pleasure. Greg and I will come visit you as soon as they allow it. You'll apparently be serving your sentence in a neighboring region, so that's no distance for us. And tell me, what are we supposed to do with your tag-along now?" Faith visits Alina all the time, brings her toys and sweets, asks our permission to pick the girl up from kindergarten, take her for a walk in the park, go to the cinema to see a cartoon premiere. I never thought the girl would turn out to be such a loyal friend. We met her, of course, under not the nicest, you could even say tragic circumstances. She defended me so actively during the investigative proceedings, spoke so fiercely in court as the main witness. You never know how such a little one will behave in extreme conditions. She turned out to be no slouch. Lord, Vince, how naive you are when it comes to relationships with the opposite sex. She fell in love with you at first sight. Chivalrous behavior, a protector. You have the looks. As for the little one, you're mistaken, my dear. She entered university after law college. She's already 23 now. You only have a 9-year age difference. She looks so young due to her small stature and overall fragility. She has quite the character. Take a closer look at the girl. You can't bring Ellie back, and you and Alina will have a lot more good things ahead. You both deserve it. The guard who led the prisoner after the visit with the young woman never understood why this tough guy was smiling all the way back to his cell. How could he have guessed that Vincent was thinking that perhaps there would still be happiness in his life if this lively person with green eyes waited for him to get out of prison? Love, you see, comes in different forms. Some people constantly trade feeling for copper pennies, while others remain the chosen one for many years, without fear or reproach. It just depends on who gets lucky.